jet carrying Patriarch Kirill cut through the dark clouds over the Atlantic like a silent messenger from another world. Inside, the Patriarch sat quietly, his hands clasped around a small golden cross. He wasn't praying, not truly. His thoughts were consumed by what awaited him. The mission was unlike anything he had ever done. Not a sermon, not diplomacy, but something darker. A plea for power disguised as divine intervention. When the plane touched down in Miami under the glow of the early morning sun, Kirill was met by a convoy of black SUVs. The men who greeted him were not diplomats or priests. They were businessmen, lobbyists, men who thrived in the gray spaces between politics and money. Their smiles were polite but cold. One of them handed Kirill a phone. "Mr. Trump will see you tonight," the man said. "Private estate. Discretion is everything." Kirill nodded, slipping the phone into his robe. He felt the weight of it, as though it contained the fate of an empire. Meanwhile, back in Moscow, Putin's circle grew more restless by the day. News from the front lines was catastrophic. Another offensive had collapsed. Western weapons were pouring into Ukraine faster than Russia could respond. Inside the Kremlin, fear turned into blame. Generals whispered that the president had lost touch with reality. Oligarchs moved their families to Dubai and Cyprus. Even loyalists began to speak in hushed tones. Putin, however, remained composed, outwardly. But in private moments, the mask slipped. He no longer spoke of victory, only survival. He had ordered Kirill to America, not just for Trump's influence, but for a sign, a signal that Russia was not yet abandoned by destiny itself. That night in Florida, the meeting began. Trump's estate glimmered like a golden fortress, its marble floors reflecting the chandeliers above. Kirill was led through a maze of corridors until finally a heavy door opened. There he was, Donald Trump, sitting comfortably in an armchair, his familiar smirk cutting through the room. "Patriarch Kirill," Trump said, standing to shake his hand. "Never thought I'd see the day the Church of Russia came knocking?" Kirill bowed his head slightly. "Mr. Trump, I come on behalf of my president and my nation. We are at a turning point," Trump chuckled, taking a sip from his glass. "You mean losing?" Kirill didn't flinch. "Every empire has its trials. What matters is how it endures them." Trump leaned forward. "And what does he want from me?" Kirill hesitated, then spoke the words he had rehearsed 100 times. "President Putin believes that your return to power could restore balance between our nations and to the world. He is prepared to offer support." Trump raised an eyebrow. "Support?" Kirill's tone lowered. "Influence, information, networks, anything that ensures your victory when the time comes." For a moment, silence filled the room. The ticking of a clock echoed like a heartbeat. Then Trump laughed again, softer this time. "He's desperate, huh?" Kirill didn't deny it. "He is. Human." That word lingered. Human. For decades, Putin had cultivated the image of an untouchable, immortal ruler. And now, through Kirill, he had admitted weakness. By the time the Patriarch left the mansion, the deal was not signed, but the seed had been planted. Trump saw opportunity, not in loyalty, but leverage. When Kirill's plane touched Russian soil days later, the message he carried was vague but hopeful. "He listened," Kirill told Putin. "He understands the stakes." Putin's eyes flickered with something between relief and suspicion. "And did he promise anything?" "Not in words," Kirill said carefully. "But he does not turn away from power, only from weakness. He must see Russia strong again." Putin turned toward the window, gazing out at the snow-covered Kremlin towers. "Then we must make him believe we still are." What followed was a frenzy of deception. Moscow's media machines roared back to life. Reports of new victories filled the airwaves. Economic data was falsified. Propaganda painted Putin as the eternal commander. All the while, the real war continued to bleed the nation dry. But in Washington, whispers began to surface. Intelligence agencies had intercepted fragments of communication, encrypted messages, private jet records, names connected to Trump's network. Someone, somewhere, had seen too much. And soon the world began to ask questions. Why had Patriot began like a whisper in the Kremlin's long marble corridors, one that few dared to speak aloud, but everyone understood? The war that was supposed to be swift, glorious, and victorious had turned into a slow, grinding disaster. And at the center of it all stood a man whose power once seemed unshakable, now surrounded by shadows of doubt, fear, and betrayal. Vladimir Putin sat alone in his office, staring at the map of Ukraine spread across the polished oak table. The red markers that once symbolized liberated cities now stood as reminders of failure and loss. Reports from the front were grim. Russian troops were retreating in several key sectors. Western sanctions had bitten deeper than the Kremlin ever admitted. The oligarchs were restless. The generals whispered behind closed doors. And for the first time, Putin felt what he had spent 2 decades avoiding: cornered. He had called for Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, not for prayer, but for politics. The aging priest entered, dressed in ceremonial robes, his golden cross gleaming beneath the chandeliers. But there was no holiness in his eyes, only worry. Putin looked up, his voice low, almost pleading, yet still commanding. "Kirill," he said, "you will fly to America." The patriarch blinked in disbelief. To America? For what purpose, Vladimir Vladimirovich? Putin's expression hardened. You will meet Trump. You will ask him. No, you will beg him to give me one more chance. A long silence filled the room. Kirill's lips trembled. Trump? But he is no longer in power. Putin leaned back, eyes narrowing. He is the only one who can be. The Americans are divided. The Democrats will never deal with us again. But Trump, he understands power, money, loyalty. If he wins, the world shifts again. I need him. Russia needs him. Kirill hesitated. The absurdity of the mission hung heavy in the air. The spiritual leader of Russia, traveling to the United States to plead with a former American president for political salvation. It was madness. Yet in the Kremlin, madness and survival often walked hand in hand. As the patriarch boarded the private jet days later, the irony was unbearable. The man who once blessed tanks before battle now carried the burden of diplomacy. His destination, a secret meeting arranged through intermediaries somewhere in Florida. The task, convince Donald Trump that Russia's fate and Putin's legacy were worth saving.